Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Becca and today we are going to be talking about some big houseplant mistakes I have made in the past. Some of these are even rather recent, so I'm super excited to share this with you. I find that making videos like this is super helpful for me and for you to just like round up some general advice and just things that I have changed in my plant collection that I didn't do before that might have been really helpful. So if you like this kind of content, make sure that you subscribe to my channel and let's get right into it. Okay, the first houseplant mistake that I have made is propagating plants in a substrate that I am not in the right headspace for. So what I mean by this is I have propagated plants in soil before, and I have propagated plants in sphagnum moss, water. Those are like the top 3 ways that I usually do it. And each of those has a different level of expectation and time, let's say like mental space that you have to hold for that plant. Because number one, if you're propagating in soil, which I think is the most mind intensive way, because you do need to make sure that that soil is staying moist, but not like too moist. And then sphagnum moss is more of the same, but I find that spag, I don't know, for some reason it's just been a little bit easier for me. I think because it retains moisture a little bit longer than soil. And then water is obviously the most passive way to propagate plants. So what I've done is I have just not chosen the right direction for houseplants that I'm propagating for where my mind is at in that moment. So I actually propagated some plants in soil not too long ago and just put it up on the wall thinking that I would remember or like get around to it in time. And that was not the case. So while it was great to like have plants up on the wall right away, they were not ready for soil at the level of care that I was giving them. Like I was watering them as if they were an already rooted plant, and you just can't do that with soil propagation. If you want to propagate your plants, hop into some videos here and there and see how other people are doing it and choose a method that feels the most congruent with your current plant care. And for me, I don't love propagating in water because I find the transition out of water into soil a little bit harder, but that for me currently is probably like the best way that I can propagate something, unless I can keep it in like a closed environment where it's not going to dry out as fast. And in that case, I would feel more comfortable using something like sphagnum moss or soil. But if it's just going to be like an out in the open ambient plant, I have to do water because I'm gonna mess it up if I don't. Mistake number 2 that I have made throughout my plant journey is putting plants in the wrong spot just because I wanted it to be there. So in the past for me, and sometimes I still even do it, I will see a plant out shopping and I'll think to myself, oh, I really want that, I'm gonna bring it home. So I do, and I didn't think about before what type of environment it would need or just what type of care it would need in general, not even necessarily just lighting, but also just like by the location that I plan to put it in my house, how much time and effort I'm gonna be able to put into that plant. This sort of ties in with the one right before this, but basically there are certain areas of my house that I just don't go to very often, and I have definitely put plants in those spaces and just forgotten about them for like multiple weeks to months, and I come back and I'm like, oh well, those plants are toast. And it's kind of like an out of sight, out of mind thing. So I don't put the plants in a place where they're going to absolutely thrive. And I just instead put them in a place where I wanted them to go. And I think this is a super, super common thing, especially when you're just starting out with houseplants. You might not be thinking, oh, this plant has, you know, these types of leaves and these types of stems, so I'm gonna have to water it more often. And if I put it in a lower light spot, I'm not gonna have to water it as often. But if I put it in a higher light spot, it's gonna like possibly grow a lot better, but I'm gonna have to water it more. There's so many variables that go into where you place a plant in your home, and there's so many ways that you can overcomplicate it. I always say to keep it as simple as possible, but one of the ways to make it as simple as possible is to just put those needier plants in places that you're going all of the time. Even if it means not having plants in certain rooms, don't put plants in rooms that you don't go in very often. We're talking like daily, multiple times a day you're in that room. Because for me, like I said earlier, it's a very out of sight, out of mind situation. And if I'm not actively seeing a plant like next to my sink or in my plant room, I forget about it. And that's so bad, but it's just the truth. And I feel like a lot of people are like that. So anytime I put a plant in my office, I'm like, fingers crossed you make it, because I just don't go in there very often for the purpose of taking care of plants. so I just don't think about it. Okay, I've been like hinting at this a little bit in a lot of my recent videos, but the third mistake is potting my entire collection, no matter what the plant was, in terracotta. And this is a really hard one for me to admit because I have been the biggest stan of terracotta. I'm the biggest fan in the world. I think it's so beautiful and very just like natural, and it fits so well with my aesthetic that I just didn't really care if the plant was going to thrive very well in terracotta. I just wanted it in terracotta. You know, I have realized now that that is a huge mistake because, again, like the previous point, I was sort of putting my desires onto the plant without really thinking about what the plant needed. And this is something that I have slowly come to terms with over the last couple of months, let's say. It started with me finally moving my anthurium to ceramic and plastic pots. Terracotta is a clay pot and they're very porous, so they do tend to dry out pretty fast. And whereas a ceramic, like a glazed ceramic pot, is not going to dry out as fast because the moisture is sort of like locked in and the plant is using more of that moisture than, let's say, the terracotta pot, which is like pulling away and absorbing that moisture. There is definitely a time and a place for terracotta, and I will continue to have terracotta in my home. As you can see, like most of the plants on my wall are terracotta, and until I can figure out a way to have a glazed pot with a lip, because I have a very specific type of pot up on the wall so that they can get clipped in, until I can find that version of a pot in a glazed version, I'm gonna continue using terracotta up there. But I have discussed in my podcast, actually last week when we recorded, this is a little bit of a spoiler, but I mentioned that I was thinking about, just as I'm repotting those, sealing the inside of the terracotta with like a spray sealant or something. That's something that I'm still sort of like working through because I don't know if that would affect the plant if the glaze like started breaking down, or not the glaze, the sealant started breaking down. I don't really know like if that would hurt the plant or like what that would even look like. So anyway, point is, I put my entire collection in terracotta because I was so afraid of overwatering, and as a result of that, I am a notorious and horrible underwaterer, and my plants just really suffer because of that. And I feel like if I had more plants in plastic or ceramic, they just would go so much longer between waterings and they wouldn't suffer so much. So I am sort of like, over the last couple of months, I've been buying more ceramic pots and just like moving them over, or like I found a bunch of beautiful 3D printed pots that kind of look like a ceramic pot. So yeah, we're kind of making a transition, and it's gonna take a really long time to fully make that transition, but it is something that I am planning and like looking to do as I continue on in my plant collection buying pots. Okay, and the last mistake that I'm going to talk about today is having too many tiny plants that need a lot of attention that I cannot give them. So I think a really common thing when you start collecting plants is to buy a bunch of small plants because that seems a little bit more doable and not as intimidating. Number one, it's not as big of a financial commitment because smaller plants are obviously going to be cheaper, unless it's like one of those rare plants and it's like very tiny for like $300. That definitely happens, but generally speaking, houseplants that are smaller are going to be a lot more affordable. And so I'm talking like anything under a 6-inch pot, which is gonna dry out a lot faster, rather than a plant that is in a bigger pot. It's gonna have a lot more soil and the plant is a lot more established, so it's not going to need as much from you. And something that I have done, like especially in the beginning of my collection, was have just like a million tiny little plants. And something that I've done to combat this in recent years is combining plants. So I had like 4 different spider plants, or like 2 different Monstera deliciosas. And what I did was I just potted them together. And so it made a bigger pot, and I had less pots but bigger plants. The level of care that I had to give my collection dropped significantly because they were going longer between waterings, and it just wasn't as many individual plants to keep my eye on and worry about. So I positioned my plant wall in a way where I have a wall of like 6-inch planters, and then a wall of like 3 to 4-inch planters, and then another 3 to 4-inch planters, and then a 6-inch planter row. And that was a really big mistake because I have like 16 slots for 4-inch pots, and that is a lot of watering because they dry out really fast and they're in terracotta, so it's like a tenfold situation. Not the best in like the design front. So in the future, when I redo the wall or put it in a new house or anything like that, because I do plan on bringing this with me if and whenever we move, I will position it differently so that I can have 6-inch pots on all 4 of the rows, or maybe just not have 4 rows, maybe instead have 3. I don't really know. I'm sort of always thinking about how I can improve my plant wall to make it easier for myself, and maybe that is something I will look into sooner rather than later. But anyway, having a lot of really small plants does make your work a lot bigger, and although it might seem a little bit more intimidating to make that bigger purchase, those plants are going to probably stick around for a bit longer and not be as much care and worry for you in the beginning. This isn't to say that you shouldn't buy small plants, because honestly, it's really nice to be able to spend like $5 on a plant you want. I wouldn't say do it every time, because oftentimes those plants are gonna need a lot more care and they won't even make it to the bigger stage because you didn't have time to give them what they needed. And that's totally fine. But I've just found that when I buy a plant at like 6 inches, like a 6-inch pot, they stay in my collection so much longer and are so much more likely to go up to the 8, 10, 12-inch pot in the future. So those are my little tips of things that I have done wrong in my plant collecting. Like for me personally, it just didn't work out. Everybody's plant collection journey is going to look different. What works for me might not necessarily work for you. Hopefully this was helpful in like adding maybe some more tools to your basket and maybe some things to look out for when you're shopping or when you're setting up your plant collection. Because if somebody would have told me these things in the beginning, I think that I would have been better off. But you know, of course, there's lots of lessons that we learn on our own. And if you have any lessons that you have learned throughout your plant journey, I would love for you to leave them in the comments down below, because I just think it's really helpful to share with others what we learn. And yeah, again, take it or leave it type of situation. So if you see something you like, add it to your basket. And if you don't, we can move on. Thank you so much for watching this video. If you're not already, make sure that you subscribe for more planty content. And if you've been here for a while, I just want to say a big thank you. It means a lot to me that you're coming around and watching my videos, and I appreciate you. And I will see you guys in the next one. Bye.